And we are back. Sorry about that. I really needed a nature break. Anyway, we were building the formatting boxes, box bunny buttons. Okay, so the hitbox rectangles are basically 6 pixels bigger than the actual icons are, or the images are. So we kind of need to offset drawing of the bitmaps a little bit to make them properly centered within these basically buttons here. So that's something that we need to account for. And here we need to draw an image. In this case, it will of course be the format icon. And then we need to specify a point, which can also be specified as X and Y positions. So we will basically just grab the X and Y position from the hitbox and then add a couple of pixels to it to get them moved towards the center. So, oh yes, abso-freaking-lutely. Speaking of 64 kilobytes code segment, can I have a cup, please? Thank you very much. And the Y position, and offset that a little bit, and that should be enough to have them now render the icons correctly. Let's have a quick look. There we go. Nice. Perhaps we should add one more to them. They look a little top left aligned. Let's add another one. There we go. And let's see how it looks. See, that's the downside of doing custom UI stuff. Sometimes you're off by one, sometimes you're off by two, sometimes you're not off. Yeah, it's just a huge mess. And come to think of it, these actually still look a little bit off. So I think I will update the build format hitboxes. We don't need this one, we need this one. So we'll do 23 here and see what it looks like. We can still do 23 because the regular Windows buttons are 23 pixels in height, so that should be fine. And it looks a little better now. So all is good, all is well. Last bit we need is to build some hit detection and the hover handling of these particular buttons, so we can get them to look like the ones on the main window here. So we'll use the same bluish hover color effect thing. And then we shall see about getting some hit stuff. Okay, that would be in the mouse handling. Let's collapse this quick. Mouse handling, here we go. Okay, and I'll just grab this one, put it in here. And now Jobon's gonna sue me for abusing region again. There we go. All right, so basically we need to do something similar to what we did for the color boxes. And part of what we did there was basically just loop through those rectangles to try and work out whether the mouse was inside them or not. Since we now have a different array, again still with rectangles, well, instead of just writing new methods for it, I think we will simply just update the get hit index method to accept one of the two arrays and then check it from there. The one thing that we do need to do is basically rename the last hit index variable to something that hints of it belonging to the color setup rather than the formatting setup. So we're going to need another variable to keep track of the hit changes, so we can properly update it. All right, so let's update the get hit index. And for this, we kind of need to specify which of the two arrays we are going to test hits against. So let's use these hitboxes. There we go. There we go. Now we can pass either of the two rectangle arrays and then do a check up against that instead of having it hard-coded to being the color hitboxes. So we'll rename these. There we go. And we're good to go. So now it's complaining about this, of course, and we kind of need to update this one. So last hit index, this, nope, like so. That would then be last color hit index. There we go. And then here we need to specify that we want it to look at the color hitboxes. There we go. And this then lets us still perform the prevent excessive use of regions. Yes, definitely. I'll purchase the first license. Need to support my viewers, right? All right. So oh damn. I'm not quite sure I want to buy a license for that though. The idea, yep, definitely. A for effort for the idea. All right, so right, this checks for the color stuff and figures out whether it has to update it or not. But I don't quite want to. Actually, it doesn't really matter because these hits cannot occur across these two arrays at the same time because they are not overlapping. So it wouldn't really matter all that much. So we'll reuse the hit index variable and then do a check on the format hitboxes instead, and then use the mouse X and the mouse Y positions, of course. And this needs to move there, and then we still need to define a variable for the last format hit index equals -1, indicating nothing. Rød grød med fløde. And similar as above, if the hit index is not equal to the last formatting hit index, then last formatting hit index equals the current hit index, and invalidate the form layout to have it actually, it would probably be better to randomly delete a period somewhere. That has far more dire consequences than just removing a random semicolon. Okay, so the last bit we need to do is to go up to the rendering stuff and implement some proper hovering for it. So let's go do that. The mouse click we also need to update to get the actual click functionality working, but we'll get to that. The rendering of the format hitboxes takes place right here. And that would basically be pretty much the same thing as above. If the current counter equals the hit index, then we need to use a hover setup instead of the regular ones. So we'll grab the rectangle drawing, move it up here. This would be the unhovered state, and this would be the hovered state of these extra buttons. Iceland is actually not part of Denmark. That's a separate country. Region expander. Yes, they do. Any case, let's see. We need to draw these pretty much the same, but we need to change the colors. And if I remember right, we actually used the didn't we use the cornflower blue on these buttons? I can't remember. Yes, we did. Right there. See? Cornflower blue. So we shall use the cornflower blue here as well. And since color.cornflower blue red, and we need the same for the green, and finally for the blue, and then grab these and do the same down here, because here we need it full strength. So here we can actually, instead of having to construct it again, we'll simply just reference the cornflower blue because it is solid by default. There we go. So now we should actually have a proper hover effect for the 4 formatting buttons as well. So let's see if it works. Yay! Nice. We've got proper hover effects. The last thing we need to do is add in the same kind of functionality, except add in different control tags. So I'm kind of keen on migrating the code that's currently sitting in the mouse click event into a separate method, and then let that particular method handle whatever control code needs to be set in here. So we simply just specify the control code itself instead of going through this circus yet again. So here we will grab all of this handling code and migrate it to a separate method, so we can simply place a call to it depending whether we need to put a formatting code in or a color code. So let's see. We will create a new method up here called apply control tag. Method apply control tag. There we go. And when we call this one, we basically just need to specify which particular char we want to use, and it will then internally go through the motion of checking the fetching the text from the text box, properly updating the string components, add in the control tags, and so on and so forth. Um, I couldn't remember the year, but I know that they still learn Danish. But that's primarily because we are actually still kind of well, it's a little like the age-old thing between Denmark, Norway, and Sweden. We're kind of family and still not really. It's the same thing with Iceland. Um, okay, so this would be the control char that we want to specify, and then we'll go grab all this junk from down here, because right here all this junk is the junk that is needed to do the proper text updating. Sorry, control code, control tag updating. So we'll migrate all that stuff up here, and then this one we need to change because right here we need to put in the control char that is passed to this method, and then basically apply the same stuff regardless which kind of control code is being added in here. It still needs to look for the reset stuff, but other than that, it's pretty much the same thing. So this now has become a way for us to apply both formatting codes and color codes in one neat little swoop. So here we will go through and change this a tiny little bit because we still need to figure out which of the two kinds of clicks we need to handle. So let's first see if this is a um, color hit or if this is a um, formatting hit. Um, which is basically the same thing, but here we need to um, simply just specify the apply control tag, and that would then be the color codes along with the last color hit index, and that then applies the color code. And for the formatting, I kind of need to actually, don't I have it in here somewhere? Um, Perhaps, maybe, uh, or not. UI parts, Steve skin, status icons. Nah, I don't have it here. Okay, off to the web I go. Um, Minecraft chat colors, which provides us with a link to the formatting codes on the official Minecraft wiki. And God, this takes forever to load. Yep, the stuff is still loading. Okay, here we go. So this is basically the one that we want. Let's see if we can get this. So K is obfuscated, L is bold, M is strike through, and so on and so forth. This is kind of in a different order than we've put the buttons, but we'll see if we can compensate for that. So we'll put in a format codes here, and then see the first one is bold, which is L, and then we have italic, which here is O, and then we have strike through, which is M, and underlined, which is N. So that's the order it needs to be in, and then we can apply the control tag using these format codes with the last format hit index, and that should then apply the text formatting code. So let's see if this actually works. Get rid of this quick. Boom, and then give it a run and see what happens. So if I grab server and hit bold, it correctly adds bold. We can add the blue. Nice. We can even do underline. There we go. And the strike through. Pretty cool. The only thing that doesn't work yet is because we haven't done the rendering for it is the italic, but we can actually add in the code. So it would be rendered in italic in the game chat. But other than that, pretty much mission accomplished for the custom selection stuff. The last bit that we need to put in here is basically a clear all codes button thingamajig, and then do the final stuff to have this dialog actually return the changes that were made to the custom text. So let's get a accept and cancel. So how about we name this reset? Yeah, let's name this reset. All right, so we need to change the for color back to control text. There we go. Now it's actually visible. And then change this to reset. And reset. There we go. Right, so what does this reset button have to do? It needs to basically clear out any and all of the control tags that might be in the text box, and then put the resulting text back in there. So it definitely needs to go through the motion of checking whether any of the control codes are in there, and then removing them. And if memory serves, oh, actually, there's one thing that I need to update, because I believe that the apply control thingamajig right here, yes, it forces a to lower, which it shouldn't, because these control tags are case sensitive. So I need to remove that, like so. That way we have the option of having help and reset, for example. And by having this as the custom text, if I kept the to lower, that would force this R to become lowercase, which then triggers a reset of the formatting, which effectively removes this, converting this into which doesn't make any sense. It has to respect the case. So that's why we are removing these. So the reset button, we'll do a method up here that does the actual reset for us, because we need to loop through and check all the different control codes with both of the control symbols, the ampersand and the section sign symbol thingamajig. So reset formatting. There we go. And for this, we will have control symbols, which will be the ampersand and the section sign. And we will also have control codes, which will be the colors, A, B, C, D, E, F, and then we need the shoot. Let's see. Da, 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 L, M, N, O. I believe K is in there as well for obfuscated, and then the R for reset. So these are the ones that we need to remove. And that's something that we need to work through the current text equals the text box. There we go. And then we need to loop through and check for both sets of symbols and all of the control codes. If any of them are found, then we need to cut them away. And we can't exactly just go in and do a replace because reasonable reasons. Of course we can. Yeah, well, yeah, we'll do it with replace. That should be enough. Ew. I'm sorry, but regular expressions was invented by somebody that didn't have his head screwed on correctly. Regular expressions is supported pretty much everywhere today. Honestly, I find regular expressions needlessly overly complex to accomplish something that can easily be done with simpler means. Why some academic would ever invent something so stupid is way beyond my comprehension. I know that there are people that absolutely love regular expressions. I don't. I find it one of the most crazy inventions ever envisioned for any kind of programming. But I guess you kind of have to be an academic to understand the power and the strength of regular expressions, but everybody struggles with them, so I don't quite get why it's still there. um, all right, so for this, we kind of need to loop through this twice. And the reason we need to do this is because we have two symbols and we have X amount of control codes. So once for each symbol and then through all the control codes. So we'll do these symbols first. Don't get me wrong, if you're partial to regular expressions, by all means use it. I'm I don't mean to disrespect anyone that loves using regular expressions, but in my opinion, adding regular expressions for parsers should only be done if you don't have other more powerful tools available. Regular expressions is effectively a library that builds on top of the very methods that I'm using here. So it's basically to make it I guess quicker, faster, less code writing to accomplish the same task. But one of the major issues with regular expressions is how you escape when you need to search and do replaces for control symbols that regular expressions uses. And coming up with those escape sequences so the regular expressions formula actually works is like, well, yeah, it's a nightmare. Um, anyway, control symbols, symbols length. There we go. And then again for the codes themselves. And here again we need to be control codes length. There we go. All right. So case sensitive replacing current text dot replace, and this would then be, I'm gonna split, actually I'll do this instead. Alright, so first we need to grab the control symbols plus the current control code, control code, there we go, and then replace this with nothing. Yes, I know, and this needs to be toString. There we go. Oh, actually, if memory serves, this needs to be here instead. There we go. Right. Well, the way I see it, regular expressions is a very, very powerful tool, and I have the utmost respect for anyone that is capable of fully harnessing the power of regular expressions. Because basically, in a simple string, you can do everything I've done in this reset formatting method with very few keystrokes. You can effectively accomplish the exact same thing. So in terms of rapid development, if you know regular expressions and can harness its power, you can save yourself a lot of extra typing by making use of it. And it is a powerful library. Having said that, there are certain scripting languages that only support regular expressions and do not support array notations for strings to index specific characters. There are some that don't have things like a replace method or a trim method or substring and similar methods for manipulating the contents of a string, where you kind of have to use regular expressions to accomplish the goal. Um, and in those cases, well, that is the only way you can achieve it. Lua is actually a pretty good example of a scripting language that doesn't fully support string manipulation at its raw, like I'm doing it here, where it kind of requires that you need to go through the motion of using regular expressions. That is the one thing that I hate about Lua. Other than that, I find it a brilliant scripting language. So that's one good example of it, and that is basically the only place where I use regular expressions because I'm forced to it. But well, in reality, you're not saving yourself the nested for loop because regular expressions does it internally. So, and at the end of the day, if it's a matter of saving the CPU cost of running nested for loops, doing the regular expression is actually way more costly than building up the nested for loops like I've done here. Um, because of the way that the regular expressions library is built. So CPU cost-wise, it's more expensive than doing things basically the manual way that I'm doing it here. So if it's a matter of cost, as it often is on, say, mobile devices, because CPU cost there directly translate to battery power, I would heavily avoid using regular expressions on any kind of mobile application if I can. Simply because it is pretty damn expensive in terms of CPU cycles. Um, so there's that. Um, but like I said, if you prefer regular expressions, definitely stick with it. And there are no. It could be about readability. Most people have a hard time deciphering what's going on with regular expressions. So most people will probably say that it's unreadable, and the exact same thing can be said about the code that I'm writing here, which is basically old school way of doing things. So there's always pros and cons of everything, and that's basically the root of all development. I usually try to avoid the kind of fanatical religious debate about which programming language is best, because that always ends up with a huge war between people. Um, I'm of the opinion that it's all about personal preference plus personal experience weighed up against which language is more suited for the task at hand rather than which language is best, period. Um, it's about time. It's always about time for developers, absolutely. There it can be no debate about that. If you have a library available to you that can do the job for you by typing 2 lines of code instead of you having to spend an hour writing 50 lines of code, then by all means use the library, and that is my personal preference as well. However, one thing that I have noted is that over the past 10 years, developers have become basically over dependent on libraries and have started forgetting how to actually put together the code that does this particular library's function. So when they don't have that particular library available, they basically have to go back to old school methods to implement that particular feature and have forgotten how to do it. And that's one of the main reasons that I'm doing these things basically old school on the stream. My phone is going nuts. I will be right back. And back again. I do apologize about that. Emergency pickup of stuff. Yes. Where were we? We were talking about forgetting how to do stuff. Yes. Yeah. Well, that's part of the reasons I'm doing this to kind of keep, I guess, the skills alive somehow. Um, when it comes to C and C++ developers, it's entirely different, primarily because of the way that C and C++ um, basically work. In both of those, you kind of need to do all of your memory management yourself. Of course, you can get libraries to help you, but it's far more involved creating applications in C and C++ than it is in any of the managed languages that we see in the entire .NET framework. Um, and I guess I'm kind of paranoid when it comes to Microsoft, but when you've been in the game as long as I have, you have seen how corrupt Microsoft can be in terms of basically grabbing power when they can get away with it. Um, and my opinion generally is the more we allow Microsoft to basically take over doing stuff for us, the more power we give them to control things and take control away from us. A very good example of that is with the latest version of Windows, Windows 10. Windows 10 basically comes delivered with spyware pre-installed and written into the core of the operating system. They call it telemetry. I call it spyware. Um, and that is the most excellent example of how much power we have given Microsoft. They basically shoehorned their spyware telemetry stuff into their operating system. They even did it on Windows 7 through a Windows update without even properly informing users that they were now installing telemetry. The way I discovered it, because I simply don't have time to sit down and read through every patch note every single time I get a Windows update. So for a while I skipped and didn't discover it. But the way I found out that they had um, basically installed telemetry on my Windows 7 was by basically their telemetry and Windows 10 deployment software eating up all my internet bandwidth. Plus, my CPU was constantly running at 50% for no reason. That's how I discovered it. And I had to hack my way through getting rid of all that junk on my Windows. That's a perfect example of us giving Microsoft too much power. They're basically doing what they want, and we have no say in what we can do. Um, exactly. It doesn't take that long to write it. Developers today, the way I see it, I am old school. I'm 45, and I started programming when I was 8. I finished my first game 2 weeks before my 10th birthday. And back then, we did not have graphics. We hardly even had color on computers back then. I learned the hard way how to do things. And I've been switching languages as technology has developed. Yeah, I'm 45. Thank you. I do try to keep a young spirit, I guess. um, But in any case, I've seen how things have developed, and um, developers today compared to developers just 10 years ago are lazy bums, and I do apologize if I offend anyone. Um, I have written several games in Pascal, actually, including arrays. I've even written 320 by 200 pixel MCGA 256 color games in Pascal, writing directly to graphics card memory using inline assembler for speed increase. Yeah, I've done that. um, but yeah, um, I do apologize if I offend anyone. No disrespect is meant, but compared to developers 10 years or 15 years ago, developers today have become complacent and lazy. If it takes more than two keystrokes, then they don't want to deal with it. And for someone like me who is very passionate about coding and the puzzles that code presents to us for us to solve, um, I kind of, uh, I guess I dislike people being lazy about not wanting to type a little bit extra to solve the problem. It's not about well, some of the reasons why developers today are lazy, beeps, I guess, has to do with oh, there's a library for that. Oh, I can download that for free on the internet somewhere. Oh, I can copy paste that. Um, It's basically the same thing as sitting back on your couch with the zapper in your hand and flipping channels 6 to 8 hours a day while eating burgers, chips, and drinking tons of soda pop and just getting fat by basically doing nothing and getting everything served right to your doorstep. Um, Debugger, yeah, we did have debuggers, but they were a little bit more um, back problems. Nah, not really. Um, well, they were a lot more primitive than they are today, definitely. No doubt about that. But some of the debuggers we used back then were actually CPU opcode debuggers and assembler debuggers instead of debuggers for whatever specific high-level language we used. Um, Devs today, yes, pretty much. You hit the you hit it right on. Um, well, part of the problem, the way I see it, deals with or has to do with the way that people are learning programming today. They learn it in schools, at universities. They learn it from a friend somewhere or by watching a YouTube video somewhere. And the way that people choose to present how development takes place today is basically a cut down video where they've removed all the time consuming thinking process, they've removed all the explanation stuff and basically gone through, then you do this, this, and this, and you basically get 50 lines of code presented in 4 seconds. And then we're just gonna copy paste this, copy paste this, copy paste this, and on to infinity. Um, and that's, in my opinion, not the way to go about it. One of the main reasons that this particular series of development here has taken so long so far is because I take the time to actually show the process of going through building the code step by step. I explain why I do things. I explain what needs to be done and go through the motions of following up with full detailed explanations of everything, including the thought process behind what I'm doing and why I'm doing things. I'm not cutting any of that stuff away. And I think it's kind of important that people, at least to some extent, get to see the entire process, including all the hiccups and the thought process stuff, and why do we do this, and what does it take to actually get this to look nice and decent. All the tweaking that I've been doing during this project along the way, that has taken up a lot of time. All the extra UI customization stuff I've put on here, I could have easily done all of this stuff with just the basic controls that come with Visual Studio and Windows in general, and have it done in, I don't know, 4 sessions. But I chose to go into details and um, explain why I'm going through this process, what the thinking is behind why I'm designing things the way I'm doing it. Um, yeah, that's a good point. Ooze says, and I have never seen any video where the teacher is using a halfway decent design. It's always for now. Exactly. Um, Yes, you get what you pay for in terms of tutorials. You're absolutely right, infected FPS. So true. And for the most part, when you get a tutorial video for free on, say, Twitch or YouTube or any other media hosting site somewhere, you get it for free, which means the quality of it is basically equally expensive, I guess. Um, and I'm absolutely making no money doing these streams. I do it for my own pleasure. I do it for the company of you great people in my chat, and I do appreciate how alive my chat is today. Thank you very much, everyone. And yes, documentation is free. But yeah, I'm I'm doing this for my pleasure and to kind of try and get some debate started here and there in the corners. Um, Talk about things. Try and revive the skills of past to strengthen your own abilities. In terms of your future skills. If you know how to implement the code of rectangle that contains pass a point as argument, if you know how to implement that and you can do that in your sleep, then by all means use the library. But every now and then, I believe that you should go back and do it the old school way, just to keep your skills honed and active, because we as human beings very easily go out and forget things that we don't use that often. And in the world of programming, the sharper your skills are, the better a developer you are, and the better money you can make. So it's all up to your choice as an individual programmer to decide what kind of programmer you want to be. If it's I have to develop 15 applications in 2 hours, and you choose to work that way, then yes, you will definitely have to rely on a ton of libraries here and there. But when it comes to libraries, there is one thing that you always have to keep in mind. You may save some time, but at the end of the day, you may also end up being forced to pay royalties for using said library or multiple libraries for that matter. Um, and when it comes to your income, if you have to cut away, say, 20 or 30 or 40% of your income and pay that back in royalties, then how much have you gained by saving maybe 1 or 2 days development time but using some other library somewhere instead of writing the code yourself. So it's all a matter of choice, and of course also personal preference. Well, I guess I'm just trying to uh, teach people coding skills of the past, I guess. Cue the cobwebs and the dust. um, hmm, can't say I've heard of Casey Muratori, but I think I'll note that for my future research queue. Um, yeah, well, some people actually do spend some serious time putting up some decent, solid tutorials and go through stuff in proper detail and proper context. And I have nothing but respect for the people that actually take the time to do things properly in terms of teaching. Um, I'm not claiming to be a high-end professional teacher myself because I'm not. But I always go into this with an open mind. And I'm definitely always up for a good debate when it comes to all these things that we call programming. And there are a lot of things involved in this. It's not just the code. It's designing, it's data handling, it's data manipulation, data conversion, it's basically you name it and it's in there on some level or another, even psychology. So there's a lot in it, definitely. Anyhow, let's see. Where were we? We were doing the reset stuff. Okay, so this should take care of killing those, replacing them with nada, and then we'll stuff it back in the text box. See what happens, and just for the sake of resetting cursor position, we'll set the selection start to 0. And also for the selection length. So that should take care of that. And then we'll grab this one and call it from the reset button. There we go. Ah, okay, cool. Yeah, well, I have actually kind of how should I put this, aired the idea of doing some kind of game as the next project on stream. But I'm definitely open to suggestions. So if anyone has any kind of project suggestion that we can do on stream, then by all means the chat is open, and I'll put them up for consideration, definitely. The one thing that I will mention right away is that I'm not particularly strong in DirectX and OpenGL development or Unity for that matter. So I probably won't be doing any of those kind of projects, at least until I'm a little more confident in the code. If I'm supposed to teach it or showcase it, then at least to some extent I need to know what it does and how it works and such. So I might not want to do projects like those, but other than that, pretty much suggestion box is open. As long as it's in C#, I don't want to venture into trying to teach C++. Um, you should look at what's his name? The Cherno, I think he is on YouTube. He does some pretty excellent C++ stuff. He would probably be a good place to begin. Let's see if that code reset thingamajig works. See, we'll put some stuff in here. There, and E. This one needs to be red and underlined, and that one we'll replace with this, and then we'll do a reset and see what happens. Boom. Nice. Yeah, pretty much. Keep in mind that the Cherno project, yeah. When it comes to C++, you're primarily dealing in things like pointers and such. And when it comes to pointers, that's pretty much the instant where most I want to say something here, but I don't want to offend anyone, so please don't take any offense. But developers with less experience pretty much go, I don't get pointers. I'll go back to some of the other languages that I understand. I grew up with pointers. Back then, we didn't have managed languages like we do today. So I know what a pointer is. I know how it works. I know how to work with them. So I don't see them as a huge problem. But a lot of newer developers don't quite grasp the idea behind a pointer, and doing stuff in C++ is full of pointers and references. So um, one of the major differences. Okay. Well, apart from doing the italic, yes, pointers are beautiful, absolutely. JavaScript has ruined everything. The last thing that we need to do here, well, a couple of things that we still need to do. One of them is the create some better ASCII converter and update the custom font rendering stuff that does the Minecraft font so it can do the italic rendering. That needs to be done still. But other than that, I guess we can pretty much just do the return stuff here and see if we can. Let's see, that would be this one equals the text box, and then we'll basically just do the dialog result, which will then close it. Dialog result equals dialog result dot OK. Job done. Thank you very much, and you take care, Tired Acrobat. Don't be too tired, please. We can't have you tumbling around. It was great to see you. I hope you'll stop by again. Where to look up C# tutorials? Well, if you go on Microsoft's documentation site, MSDN, They actually have some somewhat decent C# beginner guides. Um, um, Other than that, well, Google is your friend. Um, if you want it really down to absolute beginner stuff, then include something like absolute beginner in your search term, and you should be able to find some good links here and there. But Microsoft has some okay startup in documentation for getting into C# and getting started with it. Um, and of course YouTube or a live stream with someone teaching the very basics of the language. Well, no, don't feel bad. Stack Overflow is one of the go-to sites, so don't feel bad about that. Continue using it. Definitely, it's one of the better resources in terms of learning stuff. So don't feel bad about that. Definitely not. I hit Stack Overflow if, I don't know. I have no idea. Just 50 times a week, maybe, if not more. Um, I mean, when you get to the point where no, it's not a good place for beginners. There are a lot of trolls there, definitely. But as long as you don't participate, um, Stack Overflow is perfectly fine. But be sure that you read the entire page before you take anything for granted that's being posted in a thread. Um, Read the page. Um, but it is one of the go-to um, places, definitely. Stack Overflow is not always right. No, that is true. Um, and this basically leads me back to one of the most important things when it comes to becoming a developer or being a developer. As a developer, it is your job to solve the puzzle that is the code that can do the task at hand. Um, However, as a developer, it is your responsibility to apply some measure of paranoia when it comes to looking for solutions on the net. Um, Keep in mind that most of the internet is created, maintained, and updated by random people. They could be at your skill level. They could be uber lead hacksaws. They could be top professional developers. They could be anybody, which means 80% of what's on the internet might be correct, and the rest is junk. So apply a healthy amount of paranoia when it comes to searching for solutions. Do not accept the first solution you find as the only right way to do it. Research whatever it is you're trying to learn and um, go through what you find and see what kind of differences you can find between the different ways of achieving any particular goal, and then apply whatever part of those different solutions that you feel is the one you understand the best. Um, that is my opinion on how to approach all of this stuff. Doesn't matter if you're a complete beginner or if you are a seasoned pro. Um, my opinion is that you should always apply this method of researching solutions for whatever puzzle you can't work out yourself or don't have time to work out yourself. Spend the extra minute or two to look at more solutions than the first one that you get on Google. Check what others have found. Look through, say, the first 2 pages on Google and see what kind of differences you can find, and see what kind of comments you find on things being asked on Stack Overflow or similar sites, and then take it from there instead. That's, in my opinion, the right way to go about business. Do your research. because in doing the research you also learn the differences between how things are achieved, whether they are right or wrong. And on top of that, you should also keep in mind that when it comes to code, there is effectively no right way or wrong way to implement a piece of code that solves the puzzle at hand. If your code solves the puzzle or the problem and does the job, then the code is correct. And it doesn't matter how you implemented the code. As long as it works, it's correct. The next step in that debate is, of course, the debate about code optimization, code minimization, and CPU versus memory costs in achieving the goal. Those debates are always heated, and they always rely on personal preference and so on and so forth. So good one. Oh man, awesome. So yeah. Um, okay. Yeah, let's have a quick run here and see what we've accomplished. Well, um, we have a little bit of custom UI built in this project. Yes, I know that this test button down here doesn't follow the rest of it. It's just a test button, so it doesn't matter. Um, we've got the editing stuff here, including the server properties, UI stuff. The next step would, of course, be to implement that text customization dialog as part of basically this dialog, because we want to be able to do custom message of the day for the server properties file. We also need to at some point change the schedule UI. This entire setup needs to be changed so it can accommodate basically custom messages being linked to specific kinds of events, maybe an option to enable, disable those custom messages. So at some point we may want to consider doing a kind of UI revamp. I guess this, well, it works as it is, but it might not be as intuitive, I guess. So we could probably do some UI revamping. John Skeet can divide by 0. That's a pretty neat achievement. That's one of the more interesting questions in life. Can you divide by 0? CPU says no. John Skeet says yes. Um, yeah, definitely need to put in the custom message stuff somewhere. At the moment, I have no idea where to put that in. Maybe put it in underneath the config stuff as part of the server profile, maybe. And then list the two kinds of schedules, one of them being the restart schedule, the other one being a backup schedule. So those would be options for it, I guess. I don't know. We'll see. At the moment, I have no idea where to put it, and it's perfectly normal not knowing how to go about something. Usually it's part of the development process, working out where things should go, how they should be linked together. Sometimes when I do projects, I can go through 3 or 4, maybe more iterations of UI revamping, simply because I'm not satisfied with how it looks or how intuitive it is, how it links together, whether it's decent or not. A lot of different things that can determine whether I feel it's time for a UI revamp. And yes, sometimes it means I'll go out and completely delete everything and start from scratch. Had this been part of say a job somewhere as part of a business development team, then that's something that's being frowned upon, which is why the planning process for a project usually precedes the actual development and usually takes a lot of time to go through. Like we always say, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. And that is perhaps one of the most true statements ever made. For this particular project, I had a general idea of where I wanted to go with it, but honestly, I did little to no preceding planning for this particular project because I felt it would be more valuable to be part of the process, or at least be able to follow the thinking process and the design process of the project itself. So I wanted to have that as part of the actual stream series, just to give a better impression of how long it actually takes to develop something. Sometimes people today think that developing software or developing games or developing features or whatever websites, oh, it's just 10 clicks and 50 keystrokes and it's done. Well, the sad truth is that that doesn't even happen in a perfect world. Maybe in 150 years, when we've got fully self-aware AIs that can do all the thinking for us and basically decide the fate of the world in a millisecond, then yeah, we might have AIs that can do it. But um, oh yeah, absolutely. Uh, I mean, planning. Well, it's a matter of you have to do some amount of planning. Um, but often when we're talking about such huge government software projects, the major problem there is that the so-called experts that they rely on are, for the most part, people that couldn't make it in the commercial private sector because their skills are lacking. Or they hire some, I don't know, so-called expert design company that has little to no actual development experience and therefore basically gives bad advice. I mean, if you take a look at some of the big software companies around the world and look at their planning process, they always, and I cannot stress that always enough, always include some of the most experienced actual developers in the company, and they even go out and include um, some of the low-ranking developers to get an actual idea of what kind of time span is expected for implementing such and such feature as part of the planning process, so they can better get a better idea of the actual commitment required. And yes, the so-called experts get paid anyways. They don't care. Or they go out and hire some family member or a friend of the family in their company just to support them. And of course, it ends up horrible. We've seen that way too many times here in Denmark. One of the worst things that our banking systems did was invent that stupid paper key card thing and a Java application as the login box. When the IT industry in Denmark in the private sector at that time already had other solutions on the table that were light years ahead of that crappy Java crap they came up with. But they just wouldn't listen because, this is what our experts say we should use. Perfect example. Anyway, sidetracked. um, but yeah, it is problematic, especially for government projects. But as independent developers, yips, we do. Um, but as independent developers or part of a private sector development team of some sort, um, well, you always have the benefit of basically an average higher skill level, um, and you can tap into better resources, which means your planning process will get a much better infusion of knowledge, which for the most part leads to a better planning process. And when the planning process starts going into, we also need to discuss these 5 billion different details about the project, that's where you need to basically go. This is where we stop. All those individual details are details that we will discuss when they present themselves. Other than that, we do not discuss them. That's my advice. Don't go into the nitty-gritty details in the planning process ever, because that basically locks the project to only doing things one way. And if the project at some point needs to go in a different direction, then you basically run into the scenario where you have to halt the development process just to go through a secondary planning process to work out those kinks. And that can very often spell the death of a project. So plan the overall major parts and major components of it, but leave the nitty-gritty to a more fluid way of dealing with them, I guess. I know that the money people always want to discuss all the details, and they definitely do not like when developers go and tell them, well, those nitty-gritties, well, we need to set aside some amount of time for it, but we will not discuss those details. Simply because all the other major components need to be at least somewhat implemented before we can actually get into those nitty-gritties, because we have no idea where that particular feature will drag the UI, for example. If this feature needs that kind of UI change, then discussing these particular details now that need to be implemented 2 years from now will have little to no relevance at that time. So leave the nitty-gritty on the ground where they belong, and then stick to all the major parts. I mean, if you're discussing how to build a car, then the major components, well, the chassis, the frame, four wheels, a steering wheel, some brakes, and that's basically it. Those are the major components. How long will it take to make those? And then you can discuss the bodywork details and windshield details and all that stuff when you get to them. And usually when you have something that you can actually take a look at, here's a model or here is a prototype that we can touch and feel and turn around and turn upside down, paint green and burn on the stove and whatever. When we get to that stage, then it is a heck of a lot easier and faster to discuss, oh, I don't like that pink interior, for example. It needs to be black. That's a tiny detail, but that's a detail that we didn't need to discuss 5 years ago when we did the initial planning of the project. So that's kind of it. Um, Anyways, this turned into, I guess, open up the floodgates and let everything out. Um, all right. Um, let's see if we can do something a little more than just having a test button here, I guess. Um, yeah, this would be the test button stuff. So all of this stuff, yeah. See, we definitely need to change those other UI dialogues at some point. Um, yes, absolutely. Um, yeah, and another thing I actually want to mention, talk about, quality assurance and time to debug. And those are two factors that in today's super speedy development are often left out. Quality assurance is about doing a proper alpha and a proper beta test of the software before releasing it. I'm pretty sure that people have run into early access games on Steam that have been so bug riddled that you were afraid that your computer would blow up because of all the bugs. Um, you've even run into situations where you've went and purchased, yeah, I know that one as well, and it sucks when you're stuck in it. um, it's a little easier avoiding those kind of things in C Sharp because it's a more managed language. So the common language runtime takes care of a lot of things for you, plus the IDE and IntelliSense helps you a lot along the way to avoid those particular issues because it basically tells you, hey, you're an idiot. Yeah, I know I can't assign a string to an integer. You're an idiot. Yes, I know I can't assign a string to an integer. I'll fix it. And then you start the program and it says there were build errors. Oh, damn it, I forgot to convert it. Yeah. Um, Today, when we see software released, and especially when it comes from Microsoft, as of late, oh, we will build this and then we will release it. And then whatever bugs people find, we will fix in a future patch. If you take a look at how often you get software updates on your desktop computer and on your smartphone, that is the perfect example of how corrupt the entire software industry has become. And here I'm not talking about financial corruption. And Linux is no better. Linux is actually worse when you really take a look at it. Um, the major problem here is that the um, how should I put this? The old school quality assurance has completely been forgotten. It's all about pushing releases. It's all about pushing updates. It's all about getting things out. And the major reason it has become this is because somebody at some point started doing that and started getting people into the habit of, oh, I'll get an update every week for this. Cool. In my opinion, there's nothing cool about that because that weekly update that you are getting is basically a weekly fix upon fix upon fix of something that should have been put through a proper alpha testing phase and a proper beta testing phase, just like we did in the old days. That was proper software quality assurance. But the problem today is that software developers and software companies can, for the most part, not be held reliable for their crappy software destroying data and trashing computers today because of the way that software law is basically still in the Stone Age compared to how people do things today. Um, um, Basically, no, it's not. It's just as bad everywhere. And it's all in the name of getting things pushed and getting things released, unfortunately. Um, when people ask me when they should expect, say, a test build or a proper release on something that I'm working on, unless they dictate the schedule, my response is always to them, you will get a test build when I'm satisfied that that particular test build is sufficiently solid for you to um, use it and test it properly. And whatever bugs you might find will, for the most part, only be oversights on my part in terms of how that particular person should interact with my software. Um, More often than not, anything that I push as a beta test, I push it as a proper beta test and let people know this is a beta version. It may contain bugs. Given that it is a beta version, yes, exactly. No one cares. Hi, Pin. Good to see you, mate. Um, when I push a beta, I have tested and tested and tested and retested every aspect of the code that I have written for it as much as I possibly could. However, I also know that I am just a human being, which means I am not perfect, which means there will be situations that I didn't think about, that I didn't foresee, or I might have not properly implemented error catching somewhere, which could lead to a crash. And for the most part, when I push a beta, people usually provide the feedback that, are you sure this is a beta? I haven't found a single thing wrong with it, and it runs super stable and super solid, and it's sufficiently fast at doing the job at hand. This should not be a beta, this should be a proper release. And when I get that kind of feedback from whoever is beta testing for me, then that is when I decide, okay, I'm going to remove the debug code, I'm going to remove the logging code, and then I'm going to recompile it and push it as a proper release. But I don't do that until I have gotten that kind of feedback. And I don't do that because I firmly believe that it is vitally important that we as developers demand of our users that they put some effort into helping us discover what bugs we might have made. But before we get to that point, we need to rely on a closed team of proper alpha testers that can assist us in running the application and working out all the kinks of it so we can fix those for the beta. The beta test is where you need to bug fix. It's not where you need to implement. That's part of the alpha stage. And people have completely forgotten that, including companies today. Nobody does it properly anymore. If you take a look at the much anticipated Star Citizen, Roberts Space Industries, Chris Roberts' pet project at the moment, he is doing everything in his entire team across continents to follow the old school quality assurance alpha stage, beta stage, push, and they all do it. Every single member of his entire team, both in the US and in the UK, are forced through those proper stages because Chris Roberts demands it. That's why his name is associated with quality. He demands it of everybody, and that's why whenever something unanticipated happens as part of the actual alpha testing that people are doing on Star Citizen at the moment, whenever something crappy happens, like there was a while back a release of the PTU test stuff, where players basically ended up with something like 5 or 10 FPS while testing the latest release of the game client versus their server environment, which basically led to most streamers having to shut down the game and postponing streaming any parts of the game for a couple of months while Chris and his team tried to pinpoint those particular issues and fix them so they could push another release where those bugs were fixed. And everybody that worked on those particular bugs, they basically worked more or less 16, 18 hours a day just trying to work out those kinks and fixing those problems so they could get a proper push done of that alpha release. But it's still just an alpha. Bugs are to be expected. Yet everybody that streams Star Citizen basically treats it as if it is a pre-release, which it isn't. It's still being actively developed. And those that are streaming it and recording YouTube videos and putting YouTube videos up of whatever Star Citizen adventures they go on, well, of course they're helping the hype for the game. I'm super hyped for it, and I can't wait. But I have to admit, I have yet to play a single second of Star Citizen. I've pre-purchased some stuff, yes, but I have not even installed the game yet. Because A, I know I don't quite have the hardware for it. 4 years, I believe, something like that, 4 or 5 years. I can't remember. Um, and it is growing by the month now in terms of content and how much stuff they are getting implemented and working, and the graphics engine they're tweaking and building. It's only have one word for it: wow. Holy smokes. Those guys really know what it's all about, definitely. He's basically gone and hijacked pretty much the best developers from every big development company out there. He even went and stole a couple of CryEngine developers from the original CryEngine team. They're on his payroll now. So the guy knows his stuff, and he knows which people to go get, definitely. But that's the one interesting thing about the phenomenon known as Chris Roberts. And it was even like that back in the day when he did the Wing Commander series. Um, Everything is tried, tested, tried, tested, tried, tested, and then pushed for an alpha test. And everything that's being discovered as part of the alpha test, real serious time is being set aside to properly address those issues, examine them, investigate them, see if a fix can be worked out, and if a fix can't be made, then the feature is simply removed until something else comes along that can help fix that particular issue. It's typical Chris Roberts, and he and his team are basically the only ones at the moment that are doing this kind of in-depth quality assurance of the code being developed. Um, Even Microsoft's development department doesn't have this level of quality assurance anymore. Blizzard Entertainment might be the one of the few other game development companies out there that follows the spirit of what Chris Roberts does in terms of quality assurance. But even they get it wrong every now and then. But for the most part, you get a pretty solid product from Blizzard Entertainment whenever you buy it. There are a few of the old companies left that stick to the good old it will be released when it will be released. We will not venture into date speculation. And in my opinion, even though it may piss off the consumers having to wait for stuff to be released, I still believe it is the right way to go about business, because at the end of the day, you end up with a quality product versus a product that has to be updated twice a week because of some bug that has been pushed and released, or a security hole, or something that ends up killing somebody because this was a critical piece of software that nobody cared to properly test before it went out. Um, uh, During some of the Iraq conflicts, there was a missile defense battery of some sort that had a timing software bug that eventually led to those defense missiles not being able to properly protect the soldiers, and people died because of it. That's how critical it is to fix bugs and properly test things and hunt them. And it's just not being done anymore. It's all about getting things pushed to get your name out there and try and make money, or scam people out of money and run away with the cash when you've tried to push some product that's riddled with bugs, as in, I don't know, early access or pre-release or whatever, and then never finish the product. People do that too. It's seen all the time on Steam. It's nothing new. It's been going on for the past 10 years at least. As developers, I think it's our responsibility to basically tell the people higher up, you might want to do that, but if you want to do that, then you're going to have problems with the entire development team, because we stand together as the entire team and tell you guys that's not going to happen. Um, the problem is that people are too scared today to lose their jobs, to basically stand up for themselves and tell the higher ups that, guys, you need to do this the right way, and this is not the right way. Um, Stand up for yourself. Part of being a developer is you have the power to control the code, because you have the knowledge that is required to harness that power. And given how reliant the entire world has become on everything digital, you as a developer have the ultimate power. So, um, yeah, perfect example. That's a perfect example of something that hasn't been tested properly, or somebody that didn't properly spend the time required to think it through. I mean, and it's seen all the time. I don't claim to be a perfect developer. I never have been, but um, of course, for the most part, when I do code, some may question why I do things the way that I do them, and some may question why I choose to basically go in and spend the extra time doing things manually when a library being included can do the job for me. Um, well, given the crappy level of quality that we see on software in general today, honestly, I'm scared to use a third-party library because I have no idea whether there's spyware in it. I have no idea whether there is some kind of oh, we have to rush this to get it released bug in there that will eventually end up crashing my application, causing me and my company to be sued because my application failed because of some third-party library that didn't do things properly or error catch correctly or didn't account for some given situation that I am basically helpless in trying to fix because hey, it's part of that library. And when I can't contact the company, either they don't respond or they filed for bankruptcy a month ago, which basically puts me up to having to find a new library that can do the same job. Um, nah, no thanks. That's not my cup of tea. Um, but that's basically what a lot of software development companies today have to contend with. Um, and for me, well, if it takes a year longer for me to develop this before I can probably release this, whatever this is, then it takes another year for me to release it. Honestly, I don't care about the time it takes because to me it is way more important that I can produce a piece of software that will run on basically every environment that this particular software potentially will end up running on, and do so without crashing or causing data corruption. Because I have spent the time to properly secure that this particular application does the job it's intended to do without causing harm. And it has been properly quality assured by going through a proper alpha phase and a proper beta testing phase before it was pushed as a proper release. Um, yeah, sometimes it does take longer doing things this way, and there's no economy in doing that, and the money people are absolutely correct. Yeah, perfect example. Um, the money people are absolutely correct. Of course, it'll be more expensive doing things with proper quality assurance, but at the end of the day, how expensive will lawsuits be when you have half the world suing your company because your software fucked up? I mean, um, for how long are we going to basically dance around the problem that is, will this hold up for scrutiny or not? Will this blow up in our face if somebody actually pushes this particular piece of software to do the task it's intended to do and it royally screws up? Um, uh, I mean, is it really worth trying to save X amount of money during the development process and running the risk of it majorly screwing up, basically ending up with I don't know, governments and unions and whatnot putting down laws that dictate this particular company must do this to fix that particular problem that they caused. Hint, hint, nudge, nudge, Microsoft. Um, I mean, that's the kind of thing that we're into these days. And that is, in my opinion, everything that's wrong with the world today. Um, it's it's just so wrong going down that road, and we've been going down that road for far too long. Um, and it's all in the name of oh, I have to do my job. Oh, I have to earn my money. Capitalism at its best. Um, Nothing wrong with that, but when it comes at the cost of people's lives, because some economy specialist somewhere decides that, oh, we are going to cut away the testing phase because it's too expensive, then, well, that money person, in my opinion, belongs in a jail. But yeah, that's just my opinion. um, Anyhow, I think it's about time that I go respond to another nature call. I've been sitting here jumping up and down my chair for the past 5 minutes, so I will be right back, guys.